So as they say, two Jews, three opinions. We've gotten the opinion of the original author. We've gotten the opinion of the prophets on the occasion of today's gathering. And now I'd like to share a few additional words to you, insights derived from this morning's Torah reading. So a short time ago, I was working with my son Yair's sixth grade religious school class as they were preparing to lead their annual class Shabbat. And in conjunction with their preparations, we were reading together the weekly Torah portion for that service, Parashat Vayikra. Now, as many of you are aware, the opening chapters of the book of Leviticus deal in large part with animal sacrifices. And so as we started reading the portion together in English, one of the students groaned audibly, "Sacrifices? This has got to be the worst topic ever for us to have to speak about. No one today cares about sacrifices." I chuckled and went on to discuss the ways in which we do, even today, make sacrifices, though admittedly not in the form of grilled animals, at least not in my synagogue, as an expression of our faith and values. But I was reflecting on this exchange as I was preparing for my remarks to share with you today, because it occurred to me that my son's classmate might have been off by just 1 week in her comments. Rather than sacrifice, I would argue, the single hardest biblical concept for a modern non-Orthodox Jew to relate to is the concept highlighted in the title of this week's parasha, Parashat Tzav. Now, for the non-Hebrew speakers amongst us, let me just explain that the word tzav, tzadid vav, is the third person imperative form of the verb litzvot, to order or command. It comes from the same root as the word mitzvah, which, despite our vernacular translation as a good deed or a meritorious action, actually means a behavior that is commanded. And according to a certain traditional way of thinking, the issuance of a command, as opposed to, say, a request or an instruction or suggestion, is the single most effective way to communicate the importance of the action that's to be carried out. This is reflected in a comment on this week's portion by the Rav Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, also known as the Netziv, who headed the Volozhin Yeshiva in the 19th century. He wrote in response to the opening of this week's parsha, "Tzav et Aharon ve'et banav lemor," that is, command Aaron and his sons to enact the Olah offering in particular. Well, the use of the word tzav rather than daber, to speak in this verse, the latter being the more common term to appear in that statement, daber b'nei Yisrael ve'amantan, is intended to point out the imperative that is attached to the Olah sacrifice. This shows that it is the most elevated of our offerings, since it produces no concrete benefit for the priests who are carrying it out. Now, let's go back to this concept of tzav, of commandedness. To be sure, there are situations today in which the response that one has to receiving a command is to comply with that instruction unquestioningly. A plebe at the Naval Academy does not ask the rationale behind an order to run half a mile at full tilt while carrying a heavy pack, nor does she try to negotiate when she's instructed, "Drop and give me 10. For that matter, a junior attorney who's striving to make partner at his or her firm, or an intern trying to secure a full-time position, might remain mutely compliant in response to instructions to cancel his weekend plans in order to finish an office project. But I would argue that these cases are today the exception rather than the rule. And specifically, when it comes to modern attitudes towards religion and religious life, it's painfully obvious that the compulsion supposedly implied by describing a certain behavior as commanded exists primarily in the mind of the speaker, rather than in the heart or mind of the person towards whom the statement is addressed. Now, there are reasons for this, to be sure. Central among them is the fact that American society tends to valorize the volitional or self-directed over the required or outside directed. Think, for example, of the feelings that you perhaps yourself associate when you're being assessed a tax or a fee, in contrast with those summoned up when you're asked to make a voluntary donation, right? Even when you're being asked to pay the same amount of money towards the same cause, there's a different sentiment connected with the two actions, right? As an aside, by the way, I happened to be in the state of Connecticut. I was living in New London when the state made the decision to shift the way that they collected revenue to support the parks and recreation facilities in the state. And so they moved from collecting fees at the entrance to the parks to having all residents pay a certain addition in their annual taxes. And boy, was there an outcry, even though for most residents, the amount of money that would ultimately be collected from them was less in the new system. But anyway, go figure. Our embrace of the volitional and our distaste, in fact, our disregard for that which is purportedly required or commanded, has significant implications for the way in which we conduct our religious life and this way that we structure our communities in the modern era. We no longer live in a time of, if you build it, they will come, or so, which synagogue or synagogues do you belong to? Both of these statements are rooted in the supposition that Jews will feel an obligation, be it theological or social, to join synagogues and to attend a fair portion of especially their ritual programming. Yet, as we have observed in both the casual and scientific sense, the latter in the form of surveys conducted by organizations such as the Pew Research Center, Jews in America today are not feeling an obligation to affiliate with a specific congregation. In fact, they're not even feeling drawn to attend the services that transpire at the congregation to which they don't belong. The latest Pew report found that US Jews are actually less likely than Americans overall to participate regularly in worship, with only about 12% of those surveyed reporting that they attend services at least weekly. And this statistic does not make a distinction between the 9% of the Jewish community who self-identify as Orthodox and the rest of the Jewish community. So think about it. If we were to assume that the Orthodox are fairly likely to be amongst the regular service goers, that leaves just 3% of the rest of us who are saying, yeah, I go to services on a regular basis. Another long-held compulsion that simply does not hold in our day is that presently unpartnered members of the Jewish community will feel an obligation to find a Jewish mate. Well, that's simply not being demonstrated in the behavior of the approximately 60% of newlyweds in the Pew survey, that is, couples who were married between 2010 and 2020, whose partners were not Jewish at the time of their marriage. And again, amongst the 40% of newly married Jews who did choose a Jewish partner, that includes members of the Orthodox community, amongst whom the phenomenon of intermarriage is significantly less common. So it would appear that no matter how often we proclaim from the pulpit or from the head of our dining room table that our children must marry a Jewish partner, it turns out that individuals trying to find their life's match are actually choosing to marry the person whom they believe best completes their lives and best conforms to their ideals of a life partner, even if that person is not at the time Jewish. Now, lest you believe that what I am delivering today is another doom and gloom talk about the future of American Judaism or non-Orthodox Judaism in America, let me hasten to say this is not my message today. And I'm not claiming that these statistics forecast the end of non-Orthodox Jewish life in North America, as some have claimed. On the contrary, I believe that we find both in the findings of the Pew Report and in other sociological studies of contemporary American life that what is going on right now are changes in American Jewish life, some of which are quite heartening. For example, a series of investigations by the Cohen Center for Modern Jewish Studies at Brandeis have revealed surprising trends in the way in which Jews who have partnered with individuals who are not Jewish think about and act in response to their Jewish identity and the identity of the families that they form. It turns out that when a Jew who feels attached to their Jewish roots and observance is given the opportunity to observe Jewish customs and practices in a welcoming environment, even when they have chosen a partner from a different faith tradition or from none at all, the resultant family unit typically continues or even expands their rate of Jewish participation, though they do not always do so within the space of organized Jewish community. What's even more stunning in terms of the question of Jewish continuity is that when young adults who were raised in homes in which there were quote unquote diverse religious backgrounds are then questioned about their own identity, the majority of these young people who have one parent who identifies as Jewish and another who does not do so identify themselves as being either exclusively Jewish or partly Jewish. And this is especially true amongst the 70% of such children who are being raised as Jewish. 70% of what we refer to as intermarried couples are choosing to raise their children as Jewish. And that's often with a significant input of the non-Jewish parent in creating or sustaining Jewish experiences for their children. What we're seeing is not the wholesale flight from Judaism that intermarriage was said to represent. And let's turn for a moment to those unaffiliated Jews or Jews of no religious identity. It turns out that they too are far more attached to their Jewish identity and to Jewish culture and practices than superficial demographics would suggest. Again, by far the plurality of individuals who place themselves in the category of being either unaffiliated or having no religious identity continue to seek out opportunities to celebrate the Jewish aspects of their identity. They follow Jewish cultural figures. They seek out Jewish music and books. They form friendships and deliberately form friendships with other Jews. They prepare and consume Jewish foods. They travel to Israel and or follow news and trends relating to Israel, unfortunately at the moment, not always so sanguine. And most painfully, they feel implicated in and respond to manifestations of anti-Semitism. These are not necessarily individuals who are turning their backs on Judaism. They're individuals who are seeking out or importantly, creating for themselves Jewish experiences that don't map onto the Jewish experiences that we, in preceding generations, have gravitated towards. And if we're honest about it, didn't we, and sometimes our parents or even grandparents, make similar choices in our time? So if the younger generation of American Jews are seeking out new and different points of connection to their Judaism, points of connection that they choose, as opposed to choices that are dictated to them by others, how are we as a Jewish institution, as members of a Jewish community, how am I, as a leader of the Jewish people and a teacher of Judaism, to respond to them in ways that create meaningful points of connection? Here are a few thoughts. Firstly, if people no longer pour into services just because the calendar says it's Shabbat or Yom Tov, then we have to offer ritual experiences that they find moving and compelling. Opportunities to experience spirituality, which we know speaks to the younger generation, within a Jewish space. And chances to play a bit with a tradition, to shake things up like we do at camp, right? This means ritual experiences that transpire out of our doors, sometimes out of doors, and that aren't always rooted exclusively in the Hebrew liturgy or in the settings that you and I have grown to know and love. And before you start getting a pain in the pit of your stomach, feeling that I'm proposing to eradicate our traditional services, let me hasten to add that I believe that these new experiences can and should exist in parallel to or in rotation with more traditional service offerings for those for whom these services are still meaningful. My point is, though, that a more interpretive service, or one that incorporates more English, is not inherently antithetical to Jewish belief or Jewish style of worship. For heaven's sakes, for centuries in the early rabbinic age, Jewish worship transpired in large part in the then vernacular Aramaic. And we still have vestiges of that in our service today, right? My second point, if attendees don't sign up for classes that are going to deepen their understanding of the Torah of Moses, then we have to offer them educational opportunities that are going to provide them the tools to be better, more confident Jewish parents, or that will give them guidance in navigating the murky morality of modernity and its questions. Give them a sense of rootedness in their identity and their history, and that will impart to them a sense of purpose and meaning in their lives. And I, in the role of teacher, or as the orchestrator of teachers, need also to remember that learning doesn't just happen in the classroom, nor does Jewish identity get forged uniquely over the pages of Talmud or of a Siddur. Bringing Jews together to prepare food, or to take a hike, or to create a garden, that also builds their sense of collective identity, of Klal Yisrael. And it gives us an occasion to talk about deeper Jewish values. And we also need to speak to individuals' heart and souls, not just to their minds, to their stomach and their kishkas. As Mordechai Kaplan espoused, Judaism is a multi-dimensional civilization. And that means it includes our foodways and our literature, our theater, our jokes, our style of dress. There will always be members of our community writ large for whom the most attractive avenue of entry to our shuls is the kitchen door. So let's open that up to them with programming that speaks to the diversity of the Jewish experience across continents and to the expressions of Jewish culture in various corners of the world. Giving them opportunities to celebrate the accomplishment also of noteworthy Jewish celebrity, or to explore Jewish themes in the media and in arts. And finally, on the theme of taking our Torah beyond our doors, we should be involving ourselves as a community in social action projects, demonstrating that Torah is not just a text on a page. It's a way of thinking of ourselves as actors in this world and of embodying a divine sense of priorities, amongst which fixing the world's brokenness and addressing its pain rank highly. These are just a few of the ways in which our Torah, in which the essence of who we are as Jews and who we are as conservative Jews, Dafka, can be redefined in a manner that makes it compelling to a generation that will soon be the dominant stewards of our tradition. And it also, by the way, is going to speak to that significant portion of our Jewish contemporaries who also don't find their connection to the tradition in the range of activities long associated with synagogue life. Whether they're currently on our books or whether they have dropped out of sight, we are still missing a vital swath of the over 30s in our communities. Now, we should not have to apologize for the forms of Judaism and of Jewish expression that speak to us, the forms that have been our predominant form of spiritual, cultural, and intellectual expression for generations. These are our roots. This is the trunk, the lifeblood of our tradition. But as we do so, we also need to maintain an awareness that the Judaism that we love and live is not the only nor the inevitable form that Jewish life can take. The institutions that we have inherited and that we lovingly steward are not the all-time be-all and end-all of the intergenerational Jewish project. They are our current stepping stones in an ongoing journey. And for this journey to continue, and for the significant proportion of the American Jewish population who is currently opting out of the vehicles on which we ourselves are making this journey, we need to be asking some hard questions about how attached we are to some of the very particular aspects of the Jewish lives that we have created to date. These are important. These are, in fact, definitional questions. Questions on par with those being asked by the Jewish community in the times of the Haskalah, the so-called Jewish Enlightenment, some 200 years ago. And we need to wrestle with them together, in dialogue, trying different options and figuring out which ones speak to which of us, with the understanding that there is unlikely to ever be a single solution that speaks to all of us at once. That's why we need to make space at our collective table for a diversity of offerings and religious forms. But in closing, I want to emphasize that Jews today, Jews of all ages, are not, and if we're honest about it, perhaps never have been, making their decisions to engage or not exclusively from a place of tzivui, a place of compulsion or commandedness. They're coming to our doors or not, participating in our communal life or not, based on their satisfaction, based on the joy they find, the sense of purpose and meaning that they discover when they make that connection with us. And I believe that we are collectively up to the task of making our synagogues a destination for these seekers. Shabbat Shalom. We're going to return now to the formal liturgy, picking up on